Yeah, dude, those are hard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
For some football? I am actually ready for some football.
Okay, here we go.
Today, I am here to give you the assurance that I have not forgotten you.
If we want to see the new evangelization become more than just jargon, if we want to see it grow legs and gain traction and change the world, we have got to take seriously our responsibilities as husbands and fathers, and especially as sons of God.
I want to propose to you then that something that our world is desperately in need of in the midst of this crisis is Catholic Christian masculinity.
If you want to be a good father, then bring your children to confession with you.
I can't get there unless I become a man of ascesis, a man of asceticism, a man of training.
A man not doing penance, a man not disciplined, is not a man.
You guys have upped your game.
You know what, guys? I gotta say, I love the concept of Man Show.
Warning: the Catholic Man Show is about to begin.
Welcome to the Catholic Man Show. We're on the Lord's team, the winning side, so raise your glass. You're watching on YouTube right now and you're like, that is a good looking glass. That is, look at that drinking vessel.
I thought you were about to say, that is a good looking sunburn. That's a nice sunburn.
You are sunburned, yes.
I am.
But this is our Catholic Man Show 16-ounce beer can glass. We're drinking beer this evening. It is etched with lasers. Our Catholic Man Show. You can't really see it on.
Yeah, I was trying to tilt mine forward so that you can
kind of see it, but you can't really.
I don't want to spill it.
But these glasses are awesome, and you can get them on our website.
These are actually my wife's favorite glasses.
Yep.
It's funny.
Dave, I'll let you introduce our drink.
So we're having this is the brand new, the newest Bira from Nursia, however you say it. Nobody really knows.
It was lost in translation.
Some people think they know, but they don't. They just have good guesses like the rest of us. So these are the Benedictine monks from Nursia, Italy.
The birthplace of Saint Benedict.
This is Saint Benedict founded many monasteries, but this is like his main.
It's his birthplace.
Yeah, and this is like his main monastery where he used to chill. And they make some fantastic beer. They have a blonde, and then they're extra.
Which is the blue label.
The blue, right. The blonde is very good, but it's nothing compared to the extra. So today we're trying, this is their new triple.
Which you're a fan of triples.
So the first time, when I was diving into like Belgian beer, or especially like Abbey ales, if you want to call them that, it's like, oh wow, these are so good. And then I found like, oh, the double. One year for Christmas, I got a case of all of these variety of like different beers from different monasteries all over the place. Most of them were Belgian style, and it's like, oh, the double, wow, oh, that's so good, And then I tried the triple, and it's like, gosh, I'm a triple man. It was like discovering my birthplace or something. And then I tried the quad, and I was like, forget triples. I'm a quad guy. And then I was looking for, like, where's the quintuplet?
Yeah. You know what? I'm just going to go to the 8. Where's the oct?
Yeah, where's the octuple?
Okay, we're going to try.
Couldn't find it.
We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass.
And cheers to Jesus.
Cheers.
And to St. Benedict.
Yes. So the best way to buy this is you buy it in bulk because it's being shipped. And
it is so good.
Shipping is so expensive. So if you get a couple guys together, buy a case or even 2 cases, is the route to go.
Is it $15 a bottle?
Something like that, yeah.
That's the price. That's what it was several years ago, but we've had a lot of inflation since then. Didn't know if the price had gone up, but
I think that's about right.
You have to order a lot to get that actual cost down to close to $15 because the shipping is expensive, but man, they ship it to you in these boxes that are like pretty heavy duty.
Well, you don't want them to break.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
but the bottles themselves are also really nice. Like it's a heavy bottle. You know, like everything about it is very craftsman.
We're going to bring a couple of them to the Catholic Man Show campout.
Yeah.
Along with our Catholic Man Show wine, which we have some developments on that, but I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver yet.
Don't do that.
So, but we have some things in the works, which is exciting. So yeah, the Catholic Man Show campout is September 28th, 29th, 30th, and October 1st at Clear Creek Abbey. You can go to CatholicManShow.com and check out the some of the details that we'll be doing. However, it's opened up first to our patrons, and typically,
if you're not a patron, you're just probably not going to be able to come.
Right. So, we'd love your support on Patreon.
Not that we don't want you to come.
Right. But it sells out very fast.
Even if you are a patron, you gotta be on your P's and Q's, and like be ready when we open up the signups.
Yeah. So that's gonna be exciting. Another thing that we have going on, Dave, this is somewhat new.
This beer is so good. I'm also very thirsty, probably from being out in the sun all day. This is like you have to be aware.
Yeah.
When you.
Prudent and temperance.
These two things happen at the same time, and you realize, I think I might be a little dehydrated. I'll chug this beer.
Right.
It's like, well,
don't do that. It's 8%, by the way.
I was just gonna say, how strong is this?
It's 8%.
8%.
So,
yeah.
But hey, so something new that we're doing. This is the Eucharistic Revival, year 2 of 3 years of the Eucharistic Revival.
Yeah.
We are putting together a class that Carlo Broussard is going to actually lead. And he's going to go through the Summa of where St. Thomas Aquinas talks about the Eucharist. And he's going to read what Aquinas says and the objections and the replies. And then he's going to give commentary, exclusive commentary for this class, and a handout for each question. There's 10 questions. It's the book 4 and 5 of the blue hardback set. I forget how it falls as far as like
which question numbers.
Yeah, I think it's like 74 to 84, something like that. 75 to 85
which articles.
Yeah. And so we're going to offer that to all of our patrons that are $10 and up. So if you are a patron of $10 more a month or more, you will be able to have access to this. And we're really excited because this is like he's spending out, like, now that Carlo is now here in Tulsa, right?
Which is awesome.
Which is amazing, and I work down the hall from him.
Yeah.
He and I like sit there and like talk about this before work, because we're kind of early birds and we get into work early.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot of people who can beat you up mentally and physically.
But he's definitely one of them. Yeah. So we were talking about it, and like it's just I'm really excited about how we're laying this out. Because whether or not you have ever read Thomas before or you've never read Thomas before, it's really going to be a great way to understand how to read St. Thomas and like why is he throwing these objections out? Like, why is this? Sometimes, like when we read it today, it's like, why? Like, what does this even matter?
And Thomas can be a little intimidating, but he's actually the Summa, especially, is actually very easy to read. Once you just get a little bit of awareness of what he's doing.
Yeah, I think that there's a pace, there's a cadence, and once you understand that, it's easier.
The easy way is read the question and skip straight to the respondio. Where he says, "I answer that." He's just going to answer the question for you. Then if you want more, you can go back and read some of the objections and the replies to the objections. And I think that's the fullest, and obviously like that's where Thomas is at his best, is in the steel manning the argument, right? So he's not just giving the answer, but he's first coming up with good objections to his answer,
right?
And presenting those objections in the best, strongest form,
right?
And so that's the brilliance, I think, of Thomas. But if you're getting used to him, you can just go straight to the respondio.
That's right,
and read it. But if people remember when he did the class for us on the 5 ways.
Which is still available on Patreon.
And that class is so amazing. I mean, in fact, I was just thinking about it today, actually. Carlo really has a gift for teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Taking complex subject matter and then explaining it in a way that is easy to understand, which not everybody can do.
That's right.
Even some very brilliant, in fact, a lot of times, very brilliant people absolutely cannot do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, he did
Carlos, he is a real gift for it.
Yeah, so we did the 5 ways. We spent like 19 hours, basically, you and I, unpacking the 5 ways of the proofs of the existence of God. But here, he's just going to go through, and it's going to be a 10-part series. So it's going to be like, I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah.
It's going to be both video and audio. You're going to be able to use it on podcasts if you want to.
And the handouts he made for the 5 ways were also incredible.
Right.
It was amazing how helpful they were.
So
if typically, a handout, I don't, whatever. No. You really definitely want when Carlo puts something together, you want it.
So if you're really wanting to up your understanding of the Eucharist here, the Eucharistic Revival, give us some support on Patreon, patreon.com/thecatholicmanshow. $10 more or a month or more, you will get access to that. It's starting here. My guess is we're probably going to start this within the next 2 to 3 weeks, releasing it.
Very exciting.
So, and again, 10-part series, minimum an hour, possibly an hour and a half per class. So, I mean, we're going to have 10, 15 hours of unpacking the Eucharist based off of what St. Thomas Aquinas says. So it's going to be really exciting. Like, that's something I'm going to like devour once he gets, all complete. And we're going to have him on the show here pretty soon, which is always fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to have him on.
When we get back from commercial break on the radio, or if you're on the podcast listening right now, I'm going to let you know that I went to prison.
You deserved it.
But I'm out.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles. With Adam Minahan. We're all by ourselves here in the studio.
Oh, yeah. Jim and Juan.
No Jim, no Juan. We had more losses on the farm this week.
Oh, yeah.
It was bad. What started off as we were making light of it last episode. And it's like really too much to make light of at this point. We lost 3 chickens last week. I made the joke about opening the fast food restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we lost 5 this week. We were out of town over the weekend, and they were we're down to 3. We had 13. We're down to 3. As a consolation, I did get a rooster yesterday. Deacon Harrison Garlic here. He happened to have a handful of the exact breed of rooster I've been looking for. And so now we have a rooster. I don't know how much of a difference that makes when a coyote shows up, because this last event was not a bobcat. This was a coyote.
So you got it on video?
We saw the coyote running through the front yard.
The night
like 5 a.m.
Mm.
So I think we have an automatic chicken door
that
lets the chickens in and out. So I think the coyote was there.
They know when the restaurant opens.
Right, exactly, right. Yes. So anyway, just if you guys wouldn't mind like praying for our chickens through the intercession of Saint Bridget of Sweden. She's one of the patron saint of chicken farmers.
Oh.
I have a devotion to her because I say her
12-year
devotional prayers. So, which I'm in year 9, I'm like almost year 10.
Of the second go-around or first go-around?
What do you mean?
Oh, yeah, I guess it would only be the first go-around.
Is there a second go-around?
Well, I don't know if you just started over again.
Oh, no. I'm close. In October, I'll be 10 years in to the devotion.
Nice. My dad finished it.
Yeah, he finished it a long time ago.
Yeah. which is pretty epic.
Yeah, it is.
So I went to prison. Went to prison this week.
How was it?
Oh, you don't know about jail? Oh, you would love jail.
You would love it.
That was just an Office reference. Yeah, so Bishop Condrela, along with a couple other priests and deacons from the diocese, went and celebrated the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass in the prison in Stringtown, Oklahoma, small town outside of McAllister, another small town.
This isn't Big Mac.
But it's called the Mac, not the Big Mac.
Little Mac?
I guess so. I don't know if that's what they call it, but went there. It was really interesting. Never been into a prison before, can honestly say that. And so you have to go through all the security and all these interesting, security aspects of one door opens, you got to go into a room, the door closes behind you, then the next door opens, and then you get outside, and there's, you see as you're driving down the highway and you see the barbed wire, like, bro, that's not regular barbed wire. I don't know if
It's razor wire.
It's razor wire. Yes, yeah. It's like it's like a medieval looking axe, little bitty medieval axes all over the place.
It's razor wire.
It's made to slice you.
Right.
And dig in. It's not like
you might die trying to get through it.
Right, and it is gnarly looking.
It's made with razors.
Yeah.
It's razor sharp.
However, I will say, let me tell you, it was an amazing experience to be able to pray with these men. It was really cool. So there's men there, Catholic and non-Catholic there. They, just being at the Mass, and the ones who were Catholic, after they received communion, they went back to their, like, it's kind of like there were pews, but it was not regular like church pews. It was a little different. But what they did, because there's no kneelers or anything like that, what they did was they turned around and faced like basically opposite way of the altar, and used where you sit down on the pew as a way of resting their hands, and they kneeled down,
like on the seat.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
on the seat, and put their head down, and they were like just all praying there. No one told them to do it. No one, like, but I just thought it was just so beautiful, how reverent they were, receiving the Eucharist, and how excited they were.
I mean, can you put yourself in their shoes? They don't have a lot going on, there's, and so, and I'm not sure, but I'm guessing Mass, there's nobody to celebrate Mass very often, we do have a lot of
prison
chaplains,
ministry, yeah.
a lot of prison ministers, but most of them are lay people or deacons, and praise God for their ministry, right? That they're going in, because those people do some fantastic work, but they can't celebrate the Mass, right? And so,
well, it was cool. It was cool because several of them had never met a bishop before in their life.
Cool,
and so they were like excited just to like meet a bishop.
Yeah,
which was really awesome.
Well, there's a famous story here in the Oklahoma about when Catholic radio was really taken off here in the state. About 10 years ago, the bishop started getting letters from people in prison saying, hey, I heard you're Catholic. And the people starting Catholic radio, it had never occurred to them, the prisoners they're going to be listeners, right? They didn't even think about that.
Right.
But yeah, they are allowed to have a radio. It's one of the things, even at maximum security facilities, you're very often allowed to have. So they were listening a lot. Right. They have a lot of time to listen. And so we started getting all these letters about, hey, I want to become Catholic. And the bishop one day went down and baptized like 11 people. Like, this is, like I said, about a decade ago, right when Catholic radio was really taken off in the state. But it's just such a cool story,
right?
Power of Catholic radio.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was really a moment that I really was grateful for the opportunity, and just to see these men and how eager they were to celebrate the Mass.
Yeah.
It was rejuvenating. It was joyful. It was really awesome.
So it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just wanted.
That's way better than my story.
Yeah.
I'm glad
yours is about death and mine's about new life.
I'm glad I told my story first.
Right.
So that we could have your story afterwards.
Right.
Praise God. Do you know if somebody is interested in like joining the prison ministry, what do they do? Do you have any idea?
Just you can contact me.
Okay.
from the diocese. Just go to diocese, dioceseoftulsa.org. You
Or
can
just-
find my
or,
email
like-
there and just reach out to me.
Okay. Because I've heard it can be you have to go through a process.
Yeah, you have to go through a
Like
process.
a class and get like a background check.
Yeah,
and-
I mean this whole event was about 6 months of planning, because I had to, I had all this equipment, so I had to like name each individual piece of equipment that I'm bringing and like what it was and
I will tell you, I happen to know that depending on which prison or jail you go to, it could be a lot different. So I have a priest friend who was visiting a smaller town facility, and he was in the prison and only then realized he has his pocket knife on him. He made it in because somebody's like, oh no, yeah, he's fine, and they just like, if you down in this smaller town, if you know that guy who works here, he'll just let you in. And the guy who works there is only the best, wants to follow the rules. And the thing is, he just expected this priest friend of mine, you've been here, you know the rules, you can't bring a pocket knife in, and just assumed you're not bringing a pocket knife in. But this friend of mine realized, oh crap, and had to like leave real quick. It's just funny.
All right.
It's like, what? They didn't even make you go through a metal detector or anything, like.
Yeah, some of them don't. This prison you definitely do.
Yeah. If you're anywhere close to McAllister.
Yeah.
So if people don't know, in McAllister, we have a maximum security facility. It's called Big Mac.
By some.
In fact, the movie Nefarious is set there at
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know this. I haven't seen the movie.
I believe so. I believe
somebody get on our social media or something and tell us that we're wrong.
Yeah. It's definitely
You're going to have a lot of opportunities.
It's definitely in Oklahoma. The movie's definitely set in Oklahoma.
Really?
And I think the implication is at least that it's at Big Mac. Because it's a maximum security facility.
Tell us we're wrong. You're going to have a lot of opportunities tonight to tell us we're wrong.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, that may be true. We're talking about the political ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas. He actually had, he's not really known as well for his political thoughts. He's, more of the moral and angelic doctor. But he was a man who thought deeply on just what does it mean to be a human person, right? And just starting from that. And he allowed those thoughts, that contemplation, to guide him in morality and all these other things as well. So it shouldn't come to us as a surprise that he had things to say on politics, because obviously, man is a political creature.
Well, and didn't he do commentary on Aristotle's Politics? Didn't he do he did?
I don't know.
I'm pretty positive he did.
Yeah.
So that would make sense.
I haven't read them. I haven't read that.
I have not either, but I'm pretty positive he has. He did the Nicomachean Ethics, and I think he did also the Politics.
He did. Okay.
On
That's
commentary.
good.
Yeah.
So today.
You knew that. I've shown you mine.
Okay. Well, I forget things.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about me, is sometimes I forget things.
Ooh, one other thing. As we talk about this tonight, so St. Thomas, one of the funniest things that St. Thomas has ever written, in my opinion, is the very opening of his work on kingship. So we're going to talk about the political aspects tonight, but his opening paragraph on kingship, is called De Regno, is hilarious, I think. And we have a audiobook of that done professionally that we have opened it up to our patrons. So if you go to patreon.com/CatholicManShow, another reason why you can support our show, you have, it's almost 2 hours long of an audiobook reading through by a professional audio talent his whole treatise. So we'll talk about this on the other side of the break.
We'll be right back. So this is not from De Regno. It's from De Regimine Principum.
I don't know what that means. Also,
I think it means on kingship.
Also, I was the guy, not the priest.
Was you? Okay, well,
that's why I was kind of smirking the whole time.
I honestly thought, well, at first I thought, was it you? But then I thought, no. I actually thought it was somebody else. As I was telling the story, I thought it was somebody else who had told me that. Well, don't do that again.
I will not.
Adam.
Is this 3 or 4?
This is 3.
Okay.
De regimine principium.
I wonder if that's just like some principal parts of on kingship. Like I wonder if because like that's not the whole not the whole thing.
That's still regnus. It's
right. So like I wonder if that's just translated like it's like the conjugated just a little different. Like the principal parts of de regno.
I mean, it still says on kingship.
Right.
So
I'm just I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But because I know his whole thing is on king. It's not like he wrote multiple things on kingship. He wrote one thing on kingship. It's called On Kingship.
Well, how do you know he didn't write something else?
I asked Aaron Henderson.
Oh, I don't think he would know. I'm pretty sure he would know.
Mm-hmm.
We should have invited him. He would know. Are you ready?
Yeah. Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. Sipping on a little bit of this Benedictine beer that is delicious.
It is so good. You know what? I knew it would be, and
but
it didn't. It is not disappointing.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the political ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas this evening. Obviously, neither one of Dave nor I are a political philosopher.
No.
However, like I think
I
it's
do have this book here. It's called "The Political Ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas."
Nice.
By St. Thomas Aquinas.
Nice. Which is what
it is funny. I looked like I wonder who the author is, and I was looking. I can't find one. Then I realized like that's because it's all St. Thomas Aquinas.
It's somebody just compiled it together.
There is an editor.
Yeah.
Edited by Dino Bigungiari.
Yeah. Naturally.
Bigungiari.
We call him Biggie.
Yeah. Dino Biggie.
Yeah.
But it's a Hafner Press. This book is old. I mean, this is clearly from the 70s.
Yeah, definitely by just the look on it.
Just the look of it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Hafner Press is still around, but
doubtful.
Yeah. Anyway, the book, if you can find it, it's very good. It's just it's just selections from Aquinas.
So I think we should talk about, okay, so we're talking about man is political by nature, right?
Yeah.
Like as you're talking about, St. Thomas Aquinas has a whole deal about, the natural law and how man is political by nature. One of the things that I think is very interesting that he talks about, is that because we're made for communion, right? We're built for a society.
Yeah.
And that family is like kind of the first political union.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you work your way out, but your family's not enough, and then you work into, your area, and then you keep working out, right? Greater, and greater, and that our hope is always in.
And it also goes backwards. That you've eventually, once we've been studying the classics a lot lately,
Mm-hmm.
like in our great reading group,
Mm-hmm.
in our great books group.
Yes.
And especially the Greeks, they talk a lot about the polis,
the city,
which is actually where we get the words politics,
Mm-hmm.
right? And yeah, it's the city, and how you owe this debt
Mm-hmm.
to the city. So yeah, it's right that the family is the first political unit, and it goes outwards. But then it also goes backwards in that the city is providing the place for the family to thrive. Right? And so you have all of this, you owe piety.
Mm-hmm. Which we're reading Euthyphro here pretty soon in our books group. That's
right.
Available for patrons.
Yeah.
For patrons.
Yeah. So, piety is basically honoring your father
Mm-hmm.
or your parents or, anything that has given birth to
Mm-hmm.
you. So, it's proper to refer to piety and reverencing your country, your city. And so when you read these old works, they put a lot of emphasis on the polis, the city, and what is the common good,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and pursuit of that. And it's just really, really fascinating and totally different from what we have as moderns
Mm-hmm.
today in our political thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
You don't hear anybody almost no politicians talk about the common good. And the reason they don't is because they know that for most people that's an absurd notion, because we're so steeped now in relativism, even though we don't talk about relativism anymore. It's just kind of
or liberalism
in the background, that this idea that who could even say what is the common good? Well, we don't even have a sense of what is right and wrong, what is good and bad. So
well, and
just when you read these older texts, it's so refreshing, and it just points to like, wow, this is the way. It really changes the way you think about my responsibility in a society.
Yes, and because we are, we should follow natural law, and that as political beings, so we have like the natural law says that we have a creator, right? And so the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, that we should have hope in our creator, right? And hope in that he will sustain us, right? Because he says he will.
Yeah.
He tells us he will. And so like I was thinking about hope just the other day. I was reading a little bit of Father Gary Lagrange, which I think that kind of actually he talks a little bit about this political thought, and he has this whole issue with Maritain and Jacques Maritain and Gary Lagrange is this huge political idea clashing, and he's writing about like this idea of like hope, and what he says is that hope is not necessarily like this Christian optimistic optimism. It's not like Christian optimism. It's not like you just like decide to be an optimist and like everything that you do, you go around and just like decide that everything is going to be good, and like you're trying to see rose-colored glasses, the world through Christian-colored glasses or whatever. Yeah. It's not like that, because the Christian, that like optimists are like putting their hope in a future, right? So they're looking into the future and hoping, like, we're just going to hope that things are going well. But that's not what Christian hope is. What he says is very interesting. He says that hope is actually the future anchoring in your life in the present.
Yeah. So
there's
a
hold on. Let me.
Okay. Yeah.
Just because I don't want to lose my train of thought here. So he says like hope is actually the future anchoring itself into your everyday life, and this anchor is like immovable. It's like it's heavy. It's immovable. It's like the cornerstone that you're supposed to carry your life on. And like, what is this anchor tied to? But to the living word of God, to the Bible, to Scripture. And so he's saying, like, as we move through this political nature, and understanding like what the politics are for, it's that the politics and like how we govern ourselves is for the hope in Jesus Christ, who is our Savior. Which I thought was just very very beautiful.
Yeah, it is. There is a big difference between having like, oh, I'm just an optimist, hoping it's going to work out,
right? Because
that implies that things aren't working out,
or that implies that you're going to actually make it work out, you yourself.
Well, or I guess it could imply that, but to me it just says, well, things aren't good now, and that's not actually the Christian worldview. The Christian view is that things are good now, and that God's plan is good, and like I'm not hoping that things like work out, like I hope they work out because they sure are sucky now, like no, like life is good, things are good now, and
even in your suffering,
exactly right. Yeah, that there's nothing. I mean, we can still desire things to be better.
Easier said than done as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we can desire things to be better. And you should.
Lord, let me suffer, but on my own terms.
Right, exactly. Just not yet.
Yeah. Anyway,
in fact,
so I just thought,
if you could put all my suffering in the past,
that'd be great.
That would be sweet.
So anyway, I just wanted to I thought that would be a good launching point, because I just actually recently read that, and I was thinking like, well, that's actually a beautiful way of thinking about like the hope that we are in Christians. We have hope not in a political system,
right?
Like we don't have a savior here on earth and as a political figure. That's not the case. It doesn't matter what political system it is. It doesn't matter like what country or what time period. Like that's not what's going to save you.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this today because I think Aquinas has a lot of views that the average American would vehemently disagree with. We have been trained
Right.
We've been trained about some weird things. We're like lovers of democracy, which I think is a little bit funny because we actually don't live in a democracy. America is not
a republic?
actually. Yeah, we're a constitutional republic, not a democracy. Which I think Aquinas would say a republic is slightly better than a democracy, but Aquinas looks very unfavorably upon democracies, which I think would shock a lot of people because, like I said, we've been trained that democracy is like the highest good in the world, right? That there's nothing greater than democracy. What could be better than that? So what I want to do is go through some of the different forms of governments that he outlines, talk about which ones he thinks about as being just, which ones he thinks about being unjust, and then take what his view is, his view of the best system of government, and then talk about some of the pros and cons that you get. Because he's no fool. He readily agrees and sees that no matter what system of government you have, it's always going to be subject to human frailty, to human sin. That like the problem is that humans are doing it, okay? And people are the worst sometimes. And if you get one of the worst people running a government, then it's going to be bad. And there's something about the worst people that really attracts them to wanting to power. Yeah, exactly. So I guess we've got enough time. So I'll just go ahead and get into this. But actually, let's do this first, because I pulled this out of the Summa about whether Christians are bound to obey secular power.
Okay.
So I think this is a good place to start, because I think we need to first understand that whatever the system of government is, we have a Christian duty. Okay.
To render Caesar.
If we fail to obey the secular powers are justly and I don't want to say divinely ordained. I don't want to come across too heavy-handed, but that we have a moral obligation to obey just secular power. Okay. So he says on the question whether Christians are bound to obey the secular power, he says, I answer that. This is the respondio we were talking about. Faith in Christ is the origin and cause of justice. Wherefore, faith in Christ does not void the order of justice, but strengthens it. Now, the order of justice requires that subjects obey their superiors, else the stability of human affairs would cease. Hence, faith in Christ does not excuse the faithful from the obligation of obeying secular principles. He touches here once upon the common good when he says, else the stability of human affairs would cease, right?
Yeah. I also find that a lot of things that he's built upon is on authority. Like, it's so important that obedience,
right? Yeah,
it's a virtue. Also, there's three things, like, I'm pretty positive. I either read this or heard this not too long ago on the three things, the three ways in which you're actually allowed to not obey law.
Interesting. Not by Aquinas, or this is by Aquinas.
I don't know.
Okay,
I'm not positive.
But do you remember the three?
I do.
Things?
You want me to talk about it on the other side?
Yeah. So let's.
Or do you want me to just tell you now, and then you tell me whether or not we should talk about it?
Maybe save it till the end, like after this. We're on the fourth segment. Maybe save it till afterwards.
Okay. Whatever you want me to do.
Because I want to make sure we get this on the podcast if possible.
Whatever you want me to do.
Okay. Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles, here with Adam Minahan. We're talking about the political ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas. So we were just talking about how we have the obligation to obey secular authority. One of the things I started doing a couple years ago, which I have maintained for the most part, the habit of doing, tried to make it a virtue, is I was thinking, I want to be obedient. What's something I can do? The way you grow in a virtue is by practicing the virtue. What is something I can do to grow in the virtue of obedience. And it's like, well, I don't know, like, you need something that's available to you readily, like frequently, that you can like, okay, I'm going to obey again. I'm going to obey. And once again, I will obey. And I realized I drive 5 miles an hour over the speed limit all the time. My whole, like, just growing up, to me, that was the real speed limit. And I said, and this was like something I did not want to do, but I wanted to grow in obedience. So I said, you know what? From now on, I will drive the speed limit.
Yeah, it's interesting because we, before the break, we talked about how human beings are political by nature, right?
Yeah.
But Thomas Aquinas actually makes a distinction here that they're not like when we say political by nature, we don't mean so far as like the essence of a person, right? Like it's not like you're by nature this person. Like
sure,
from a political aspect, he actually brings up and makes a comparison.
Relational. We're relational by nature,
right? But he actually makes the a comparison of just like as in virtue that you have to experience it and make it a habit. So too for politics to be political, you have to experience it and make it a habit.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
think
not
especially when you talk about politics per se, when we're talking about real politics,
right.
How should things be governed? Yes, that's not part of our nature. The fact that we are relational, like I'm a man and there is a woman, okay? Like that is part of our nature for me as a man, like that I am relational with women that way. Okay, and that's not political necessarily, but politics is, like pursuit of the common good for the sake of the community, right? So it does overlap a little bit, but I'm glad you made that distinction. That's not like, oh, I'm Republican,
right.
It's not like, oh, I was born a Republican,
Right. So
that's,
anyway, I don't know. I just thought that would be a good distinction.
So anyway, we have obligation to obey. So here. Aquinas, he starts by listing off 3 what he calls unjust forms of government. Okay. So he says an unjust form of government, when it's carried out by one man alone, this is called a tyranny or a tyrant, right? If it's, you can think of today we have dictatorships. When one man basically wields absolute power for his own benefit. Then he is a tyrant. If ruled by not one but several people, it's called an oligarchy. Okay, so I think sometimes...
And he thinks that's unjust?
He says this is an unjust form of government.
An oligarchy is?
Yeah. Now, he has... All of these, he has a version of which he just calls it by a different name. It's like where, not that being ruled by a few people is unjust, but when it's unjust... Okay, so we're going to see that there's a different version. There's 2 versions of all these things. When it's one person and it's an unjust government, it's a tyranny. When it's several people and it's an unjust government, he calls it an oligarchy. Now, this is like, he's using his terminology at the time. I think today we would just call it an oligarchy, whether it's just a good or a bad oligarchy. I don't know. There aren't very many oligarchies, actually. I'm actually not aware of any. There might be some. There may be. I have no idea. But I feel like oligarchy used to be more prominent. In fact, it worked really well in Italy for a long time, where you had the 5 major families in Italy, and what they would do is they would take I think it was 3-year terms of being in power, and it would just rotate between these families, and nobody wanted to pass a law that would hurt another family, because they knew well, hey, they're going to have the reins here in a few years. Anyway, it was actually a very long-lasting government. Anyway, so if several people, it's called an oligarchy. He says this occurs when a few oppress the people by means of their wealth, as an example. And if it's carried out by the multitude, it's called a democracy. And so this is the opposite. He says this is when the plebeian people, by force of numbers, oppress the rich. Okay, so he's like, hey, nobody should be oppressing anybody, rich or poor. The thing is, we should be pursuing the common good, right? So then he switches over to, here's our just governments. If administered by many, it's called a polity. I'm not really familiar with that term. I mean, I know
it's like new polity.
It's like city, but anyway, he says polity, like when a group of warriors exercise dominion over a city or a province. And so this actually would be the version of oligarchy, I think. It's I think it's interesting. He doesn't actually have a just form of government that is a democracy. He goes, when administered by many, it's called a polity. And he uses the example of when a group of warriors exercise dominion over a city or a province. This is not like the people. This is a small group of people. Okay, sort of similar. So in his mind, a democracy is always unjust. Or he certainly doesn't offer a just version. I think certainly you could have a just democracy, but it's complicated for reasons we'll get into in a minute, because you need a virtuous leadership body, okay? And when you're ruled by everyone, the idea that everyone is going to be virtuous is a little bit ridiculous, okay? So then he does give another version of just governments, which is a little bit smaller. He says when it's by a few men of virtue, it's called an aristocracy, and its rulers are called optimates. Never heard that term before, but I think it's cool. It sounds like maybe a transformer. Optimate Prime. And if it's by one man alone, he is called a king, if he's a just ruler. So you have the tyrant versus the king. You have the aristocracy versus the oligarchy, and then kind of the polity versus the oligarchy as well.
But Aquinas talks about how monarchy, like the best, like his form of government, and Ryan Robinson commented on Facebook. He asked if Aquinas liked monarchy the best.
He did.
Yeah, right, and he said the best form of government is a monarchy in which the king is a just king, and the worst form of government is a monarchy.
Well, he would call that a tyrant.
In which,
yeah, and so we're actually going to get into that, because he actually doesn't think it is the worst form of government. That's a misnomer. Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Interesting.
Okay, but he says his next question is whether it's more expedient for a city to be ruled by one man or by many. Okay, so what he's saying here is that the aim of any ruler should be directed towards securing the welfare of that which he has undertaken to rule. Okay, now the welfare and safety of a multitude formed into a society lies in the preservation of its unity. That's what he says. So you're shooting for the welfare. You want the welfare of the city. Well, that lies in the preservation of its unity, which is called peace. Okay, and I think there's a lot to be talked about. But he says if this is removed, the benefit of the social life is lost, and the multitude in its disagreement becomes a burden to itself. If you lose that unity, that peace, the multitude becomes a burden to itself.
Okay.
I think that's a lot. You could really ponder that for a long time, but I think there's some truth there. So he says that the more efficacious a government is in keeping the unity of peace, the more useful it will be. And then he says, what is itself one can more efficaciously bring about unity than several. Therefore, the rule of one man is more useful than the rule of many.
Which is why he thinks monarchy is the best.
Which is why he says monarchy is the best form of government. Okay?
When the monarch is a just and virtuous man.
Correct. So now, to me, I wrote some notes here that it's like, are these premises true? I think that I haven't satisfied in my own ponderings that I completely agree. Not that I disagree with.
Oh, come on.
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure where I disagree. Here's part of it.
Disagree with him.
Is that is the preservation of unity? Is this the true measure of a good society? Okay, because it seems to me that you could be unified around the wrong thing. What if you're unified in your desire to sin? Okay, you have perfect unity. I imagine hell is awfully unified in its in a certain sense. There's a certain sense in its rebelliousness. Okay, now obviously in hell, that's a bad
It's
example. An analogy. Okay, and I don't.
The Soviet Union was very unified.
See, that's the thing is I think you can be unified around the wrong thing.
The Third Reich was pretty unified.
It was, and so I don't know. I haven't in my own mind. I'm just saying like, hey, I think there's something to be pondered here. Is unity really the measure of a good society?
Well, it's not the end. It's not the ultimate end. It can't be.
No, I agree. But
unless you caveat it in saying that unity in Jesus Christ, because now Jesus prayed that we all be one.
Yeah.
And so that is worth noting in all this, but not like. But he was saying that we all be one, as he is the head of the body of Christ.
Correct. So on the other side of it, well, that actually this is the end of the episode. So make sure to go listen to the podcast where you can hear the clarification of, does he think that a tyrant is actually the worst form of government or not? Because it's not as there's a clarification.
We're on the Lord's team,
the winning side.
So raise your glass.
Cheers to Jesus.
Cheers.
Okay, so the next question he does talk about is that the domination of a tyrant is the worst. Okay, so he says just as the government of a king is the best, so the government of a tyrant is the worst. And I put in quotes here: the corruption of the best is the worst. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he says a united force is more efficacious in producing its effect than a force which is scattered or divided, right?
Okay.
So here's what he is talking about. And we know this because of the next question that he talks about. And he actually talks about it in length, but I think people skip over it. The reason why sin is so bad is because God is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If God were not as good,
mm-hmm.
sin would not be as bad. Okay? So because the monarch is so good, its corruption is the worst. Does that mean that living under a tyrant, though, is the worst form of government? He's going to say no. He's going to say not necessarily. Here's the next question. That it is a lesser evil when a monarchy turns into a tyranny than when an aristocracy becomes corrupt.
Multiple people become corrupt.
Right. So when the aristocracy, he's going to say that when the
now,
aristocracy
is he talking about though? Is this from a moral aspect
he's
here?
He's talking practically here.
Okay, he's not talking about morally.
I think he's talking more of in a moral sense when he says the corruption of the monarchy is the worst. Okay, because you're talking about you have the purest gold, you have the purest thing.
Okay,
and its corruption is the worst because you've fallen the farthest. Right, you took something that was so good and you corrupted it. Does that end up putting you, though, in a worse place than other forms of corruption? And that's where I think he says no, because he's actually going to say here that it's better to live under a corrupt monarch than under a corrupt aristocracy, or what he would call an oligarchy. He says a group government, polyarchy, most frequently breeds dissension. So a polyarchy is just a broad term for oligarchy, aristocracy, for the optimates. Just multi-governed. So the polyarchy most frequently breeds dissension. This dissension runs counter to the good of peace, which is the principal social good. A tyrant, on the other hand, does not destroy this good. Rather, he obstructs one or the other individual interests of his subjects. Unless, of course, there be an excess of tyranny, which I think is it's a phrase he uses several times, an excess of tyranny, as if there's like a temperate
tyranny.
It's a moderate. I practice tyranny in moderation, right. Okay? But he's going to use this phrase over and over again, the excess of tyranny. Unless there be an excess of tyranny, and the tyrant rages against the whole community. So what he's saying is that the tyrant pursues his own goods ahead of the good of the people, but doesn't necessarily destroy the unity of the people. Okay, unless there be an excess of tyranny. Like basically, unless he's psychotic and just like wants people to suffer. You know, if he's just demented and just wants to he just wants to make people suffer. So once again, the tyrant, on the other hand, does not destroy this good, and he's saying the principal social good, which is this idea of unity within the social fabric. Therefore, monarchy is to be preferred to polyarchy, although either form of government might become dangerous. Further, that from which great dangers may follow more frequently is, it would seem, to be more avoided. So he's going to make another argument here that the polyarchy is more likely to lead to corruption than the monarchy.
More opportunity.
Right. And he's going to say, and I think he makes a good argument here, that considerable danger to the multitude follows more frequently from polyarchy than from the monarchy. There is a greater chance that where there are many rulers, one of them will abandon the intention of the common good, and then it will be abandoned by the one ruler. Because you have more people, simply more chances for it to go bad.
That's what I said.
Okay, so
he always
I know he's like ripping off your stuff all the time. Polyarchy deviates into tyranny not less, but perhaps more frequently than monarchy. So when monarchy goes bad, it's not like it's less bad, is what he's saying, but it happens more often. This is the separate argument he's making. Okay, so it's interesting that he's not actually saying that the tyrant is the worst form of government. He's saying that the corruption of the best is the worst, but he doesn't mean, he still says it's better often to live under a tyrant than it is under an oligarch system.
Okay, so let's pause.
Good, yeah, pause.
Yeah, and let's just talk for a second, not read any more about Aquinas for a second. And I just want to get your thoughts on this idea of, because kingship to me is very hard for me to imagine, especially because even the only main king monarchy in England, it's just kind of for
ceremonial.
Pomp and it's not real.
They literally are nothing. They're not even head of the church, I don't think. Are they even head of the Anglican Church?
I don't know. I don't follow.
When was the last time the English monarch?
I don't know. Don't get me lying.
Anything.
So but what I want to know.
I still like them. That's the thing. Is I still like the English monarch.
But were you
it's fascinating, isn't it? I think
you know what? I don't know.
I think it is.
Maybe. I mean, a lot of people do.
I don't spend time on it.
I don't care.
But I think it's
anything about the royal family.
There is something, even though maybe some of them are schmucks. So in fact, I personally think at least some of them are schmucks, but there's still something
But this
alluring
is here's my thoughts on this,
okay.
on the whole kingship thing, and this is I'm very open to being wrong here, but I actually agree in some aspects on the idea of monarchy at the very beginning.
Okay.
It's almost like socialism. Socialism works really well at the beginning.
Right.
But here's the problem that I think history has shown, and that I would have a problem with the monarchy, is that once generations go, it's not sustainable, because what ends up happening is that there's an accumulation of wealth and power from the monarch, and he then passes it on to his son, or son-in-law, or whatever, and then they pass it on. But the problem is that the people that it keeps getting passed on to become effeminate, because they don't do anything hard in their life, because they don't work hard.
So you're thinking specifically about a generational kingship, where there's a bloodline So that was
No, well, I mean, like the idea of like, okay, if we're gonna do a monarchy, like if there's gonna be a king, like it works pretty well. It's like it works pretty well whenever in the first generation.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay. So
and then
the idea that it wasn't until like later Europe that the idea of divinely ordained kingship came about. Like, oh, it's
well, that's not true. I mean, that's even biblical.
Okay. Well, but it wasn't generational. Exactly. I mean, like look at Saul. David was not part of Saul's lineage. Okay.
Yeah. Well, Saul kind of messed up.
He
little
did,
bit.
but
Like,
the thing is,
so we had to take over.
God could have ordained somebody else after David.
But after the Davidic kingdom, then it was.
Right, but only because God promised it to be that way for David.
Right.
It's not like there's anything inherent to being a king that means your son definitely will be the king. And in fact, in many cultures, the son was not necessarily the king.
Yeah, so if you're proposing though that then the king does not pass it on to his own son, I think there's even more issues.
I don't think that's an issue. So one of the things Thomas talks about, we'll wait to get into, but he talks about how provision might be made that the king might not fall into tyranny. That's one of the.
Well, okay.
That's one of the things he talks about.
I guess go ahead.
So, but he mentions, and this has been the case, that there have been different systems of monarchies where it's like, hey, you're the king and you have a son. Well, your son is probably not going to be king because that's not how the king is determined in that political system.
I'm just not familiar
and
with that, I guess.
It's like the great countries in Europe that they decided it's my bloodline. That is what is important. It's because
I mean, even in the 900s with Alfred the Great and all these things, like this is, I mean, it was even bloodline then. So I'm not even sure, as an example, like what that would be and how that would play out. I mean, I'm in the limited knowledge I know, it's been pretty much bloodline all throughout.
No, a lot of it has been basically strength. You know, like. You have a son. Well, probably the king's son is going to die, and somebody else is going to take over. You know, or what it could be. There's also other ways it could be. That it could be that you have the people decide somehow, which I think sounds a little bit like a democracy, but it's one of the things that Aquinas talks about. But he says that there are different systems, things you could do to prevent a king from becoming a tyrant. One of them is make sure that don't give them absolute power. Okay, that the king does not have the authority to do anything he wants. And I think that's an important thing. And why okay, you're the king.
That would be like a dictatorship at that point, right?
Well, I mean, most kings, I think, did have absolute power. You know, they could say or do.
Yeah, so see all this stuff, like I swim in the kiddie pool because I don't understand political philosophy nor the history of it.
But a
so
king doesn't need to have, doesn't necessarily have to be absolute in his rule.
Okay.
He could be, just like what we have, and it's like you have different branches of government that have different purviews, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, all right, you can do give orders and you rule over this section. I mean, sort of like the Pope is infallible, but only with regard to morals, right?
Faith and morals.
Faith and morals, yeah. Okay, it doesn't mean that he can come in and say other things and speak authoritatively that aren't.
Well, he can, but not.
No, he can't. I mean,
yeah, I mean, he can speak authoritatively, just not infallibly.
Well, no, he can't come in and speak authoritatively on science, or he can't speak authoritatively on basically anything outside of his purview of faith and morals.
Well, he can just from the nature of his office.
No, but
that doesn't mean
his office has nothing to do with science. His office exercises zero authority in the realm of science. Right. So
as a spiritual father, it's like not necessarily everything that you say is under the realm of everything.
Right.
So like. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying that the king could be set up that way.
Okay.
you know, and if you're talking about, hey, we're a country, we're a group of people, because ultimately the governance always comes from the people.
So this is like kind of like, to me, it seems like we're kind of muddying the water. I mean, but like what it seems, based on my limited understanding of history, my limited understanding of government, but like the lineage of kingship has come from bloodlines. I'm open to being proven wrong, but like the limited understanding that I have, it just seems like, you know, Alfred, Charlemagne, you know, from all the way up to today, like all these different kingships came from bloodlines. Again, open to being wrong. But what we end up seeing is that the sons or the grandsons of this Alfred the Great or things like that end up being punks, effeminate men, because they've never had to work for anything in their life, and they feel entitled to this. And then at that point, then the polis, the people say like, listen, we can't let this punk rule our land because he's not a virtuous man. And then maybe at that point that becomes a tyranny, and then like there's like an overthrow and things like that.
Yeah.
So again,
yeah, and you're right. There are a lot of examples of that happening
over and over
In
and
fact,
over again.
I think it is most of the examples.
Right. And so again, my understanding, limited government, like I kind of wish we would have had some kind of political philosopher here on with us tonight, because it would have been interesting to talk to him about this or her about this. But I think that it seems that history has shown that monarchy is only a short-term solution to the polis, to governing the polis. It works really well at the beginning.
Yeah, and I don't know history well enough to give you an example of it being longer. I'm sure there are examples of it lasting a long time.
Well, yeah, I mean there are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was good.
Yeah.
And so again,
and I think you have to also, every form of government will fail eventually, right? There is no, it's not like there's a perfect form. Like, oh, if we had just done it differently, it would have lasted longer, it would have been better. So I think you also have to take into account the level of human flourishing that takes place while it's working, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you know, it was good for a long time, because I think it's, you know, in not all cases, okay, you have a good king, his son probably is going to be not quite as good, but not necessarily instantly like jump to tyrant.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and maybe after like 4 generations, you've got.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. But so how long does that last? 4 generations? You know, like 100 years, maybe longer.
Right.
You know,
but I mean, you see this like even in like pharaohs, you see czars, like all these like different words for kings, basically.
Right.
Like this happens all the time, like throughout history. So I think
then you get bad kings, and then their sons grow up seeing the oppression that their father is putting on the people, and they decide to be a good king, you know, and
yeah. So again, I think though that
or the bad king just gets killed.
Yeah, and they
happens
kind of do a reset.
So Aquinas talks about this.
Okay.
Let's just finish up with what he says, because I do want to get to what he says. Here's how you could have a king, and make sure, and well, not make sure, but he says how provision might be made that the king may not fall into tyranny. And so the first thing he says is, first, it's necessary that the man who is raised up to be king by those whom it concerns should be of such condition that it is improbable that he should become a tyrant. Now, that's nice.
Yeah, that's like, okay.
And then he quotes some examples from like the book of Daniel about how like
it's like
God choosing a man after his own heart.
Yeah, this is like St. Paul, like make sure you understand who you're ordaining before you ordain him.
Yeah. That's a little bit different though, because you can just not ordain him. This, like, if it's the king's son, well, what are you going to just not He doesn't get to be king.
They stall. They do a lot of stalling.
Sometimes you can. There are sometimes, I guess, could be done. And so then he says, if there be not an excess of tyranny, it is more expedient to tolerate the milder tyranny for a while than by acting against the tyrant to become involved in many perils more grievous than the tyranny itself.
Well, this is the whole thing with an American, America of like avoiding the greater evil, choosing the lesser evil.
Yeah, and he says because here's why. He says sometimes it's better to live under a mild tyrant than to try to if you're always trying to strive for the perfect government.
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, he says if you're unable to prevail against the tyrant, he might get worse. He might get really pissed that you tried to rebel against him. And also that even if you are able to succeed and you remove the tyrant, well, you may end up just fracturing the nation. And so you've lost the unity that the tyrant, even while a tyrant, still provides. He says, once the king is established, this is back to how we can keep him from being a tyrant, the government of the kingdom must be so arranged that opportunity to tyrannize is removed. At the same time, his power should be so tempered that he cannot easily fall into tyranny. So that's one of the things.
Checks and balances.
Yeah, exactly. Don't give him absolute. And I think that these kind of things have naturally played out in different kingdoms where you had kings, but you still had powerful dukes or earls, people who still they had their own army, so to speak, right? And it's like the king still had to play politics with it. He couldn't just command and there's nothing you can do about it because, you know what? Those people actually, they're pretty powerful themselves. Right? And so I think that does give a lot of stability. England, I think, did go through a period of having good kings for a while. I think that there was a time period.
Looking at you, David Bates, maybe you can call us out.
Yeah, he might know. So finally, he says, provision must be made for facing the situation should the king stray into tyranny. So having a policy in place to how to remove a tyrant, I think, is also a strong deterrent for the king to become a tyrant.
Well, maybe.
Because
what I would do is if I was a king and I was looking to become a tyrant, make that policy not a policy anymore.
But you wouldn't have the authority to change it. Okay, so he talks about.
Well, if you have Dale Carnegie's How to Win, Influence and Win Friends, you just become, make some good friends, and then all of a sudden.
Sure. So he says if to provide itself with a king belongs to the right of a given multitude, it is not unjust that the king be deposed or have his power restricted by the same multitude if, becoming a tyrant, he abuses his royal power. So if your kingship is established by the people, whatever that looks like. The thing that I find unsatisfactory with these things is that they're vague outlines, which are probably more helpful in the long run. But
yeah, because St. Thomas Aquinas was not known for super practical things anyway.
But often when he talks about things, he does give practical examples. Even in here, some of the things he's like, for instance.
Yeah.
And the for instance is often very helpful.
Sure.
But he just doesn't offer that here. So he says, whatever it looks like, however it is, the king, ultimately it's the people who have put him into power somehow, then it should be formal. There should be something that everybody knows that, whether it's a vote of no confidence from whatever, anyway, I think those are good practical things. Obviously, I don't see the monarchy coming back anytime soon. I think
you don't.
No, the only way I see the monarchy coming back is if there's just absolute devastation and collapse in cultures and societies around the world. Where the governments as is cease to exist, and you have strong leadership rise up, in order to guide the city through turbulent times.
So I again, political philosophy is not my game.
Yeah.
Right. I swim again I'm barely allowed in the kiddie pool of political philosophy.
Okay. Me too.
But
both of us.
But I would say that this genre or this area is the space that I have the most issues with St. Thomas Aquinas.
Okay.
Like, if I had to pick something that I like, what could I possibly disagree with St. Thomas Aquinas?
It would be the monarchy.
I think it would be.
So
I think the way he thinks and understands the way to govern the polis, I think in general, I don't know if I agree with.
Well, I think that there's a good question of
because
whether
obviously
it would practically be successful today
if it's actually a reality. Like, because here's the deal: you have a virtuous group of people or a virtuous man running some form of government. It's gonna do well for a while.
Yeah,
it's gonna do well. The problem is, like, you don't just get to pick virtuous men from a tree. Right, you don't get to like just
or
go
a
bush or wherever else
or an ocean.
Right,
you don't get to pick them from anywhere.
They don't like that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I think like the thing that I think I would not disagree with, but like I have like the most pushback or.
So let me ask you this.
Okay.
I think you see his line of his logic.
Yeah.
Do you disagree with his logic?
I don't know. I don't think I would disagree necessarily with his logic.
Because that's the problem. And Aquinas is this way, not just here, but sometimes in other areas where it's like, you know what? I think that's wrong. The way that you got here, I can't disagree with. But somehow it's just like, that's not the way it works, man.
But I don't because I don't think the reality is
maybe it is the way it works.
But because I don't think the reality is that you can sustain a virtuous king for very long.
Yeah.
So I think like in practice or like in principle, sure, yeah, this is the best way to go.
So okay, let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Do you think you can sustain a virtuous other form of government for longer?
Yes.
What is it?
I don't know that. I don't know exactly, but I know that. Well, so here's a raw. This is raw takes, right? We've not prepped for this in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
But the thought process that I have is that it's easy to corrupt one quickly. It's harder to corrupt a whole quickly. So if you have a handful of people that are all virtuous and one starts becoming unvirtuous, like he's a cancer and he's going to eat into the whole. But it may not be as fast as the one. And so I think like that could be a rebuttal.
Yeah, I think that's an argument. I don't know that it's necessarily easy to corrupt one. It depends on the one, obviously. And that's the kind of thing, that's part of your argument is
right.
that, well, it really depends on who it is.
Right.
And Thomas agrees with that, and he goes on to say other stuff that we don't have to get into about how, obviously, all of these forms of government are treacherous.
It's been a long time since
it's so hard for me to imagine living under a king, and what does that mean?
Well, for moderns, this is a very tough thing to even talk about, right? Because we don't have like our imagination is not even conducive to understanding these principles.
For instance, like, do you still have courts? Do you still have judges? I mean, obviously, the king is not, because when you read the Old Testament, the king would sit and hear cases, so he was also the judge. When Absalom tried to make a run at David's throne, the very first thing he did was sit outside the palace with like a whole bunch of people behind him to make him look important.
Right.
And say, hey, I'll hear your case. And so he started arbitrating for the people in order to win their hearts.
It was actually a brilliant idea.
It is. I mean, a lot of things that Absalom did were very, very smart. And in fact, before he tried to usurp David, he was kind of the only one doing anything right.
Doing a good job, yeah.
Yeah, like he was the one caring for David's family.
Thank you, Exodus 90, for like walking through this.
All of this is because of the Exodus. Like I know this because I've been doing it with Exodus 90.
Yeah.
But under a king, do you still have I mean, you must. Because obviously, if there was a king of the United States,
I'm not interested in or I just don't want to talk about things I have no idea about.
But the thing is,
it's been a long time.
I've read enough stories, enough literature. Like, I don't think you've read Kristen Lavransdatter, but
no.
I
have not read through that slog.
Okay, but I know you're familiar with like The Last Kingdom.
Right.
Okay, so you'd get set up as a king, and like, what's kind of the difference between being a king and just like the governor, or what? It's like, oh well, kind of nothing. And you might be the king of this little area, and there's another king of this little area, and there might be a high king over everything, And so, like, just because you're a king doesn't mean that you can afford to be a tyrant.
No, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
So, and at the end of the day, if you are, the people are going to kill you. It wasn't until you got into like the more. All right, because I know you've read The Last Kingdom, but it's like picture smaller groups where you have smaller kingdoms. If you try to tyrannize
like
those people,
Mercia. Let's just say hypothetically Mercia,
right? Okay.
Versus Northumbria.
Sure. Yeah, hypothetically.
Yeah.
If you try to be a tyrant in a very small area, they're just gonna kill you, or they're just gonna say like, whatever, and like. All of a sudden, you find yourself absolutely powerless because the people just don't listen to you.
They rise.
Right. And so I think that there are a lot of things you can do. In my opinion, small government is always better at pursuing the common good. Small government is not always better at pursuing like financial gain. It's not always like obviously there is a benefit. There are some things that larger government is better at doing when it comes to like international commerce or like large economies. Okay. One of the reasons why America
defense.
Raising a large military. It's a great example. One of the reasons why America has become the international superpower over the last like 150 years is because, well, we're big.
And back-to-back world champs.
Yeah,
World War champs.
Okay, that's right. But if we were broken up, like imagine every state being its own country, we wouldn't be nearly as formidable. Look at Europe.
Right.
Okay? So
if we do, never mind.
But I think we need to ask ourselves, especially as Catholics, is what are the goods we should be pursuing as a people? Is it financial success? I think financial success is on the table. It's something that like we're not going to ignore.
Sure.
But I don't think that's not the highest good.
Hierarchy is a good, baby.
Right. And so when you get the goods out of order,
take that new theology.
You get disordered.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So anyway, whatever the forms of government are, I think smaller government is inherently better than large government.
Bro, it has been a long time since the Catholic Man Show has just like riffed off of a topic that we don't really know a whole lot about. But we're just going to like just see what happens.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. So, hey, before we get off, because like I was thinking about this, and I heard this either on like maybe God's Planning podcast or like an article that I read. I'm not sure where. So I don't know where to credit this. And I apologize.
Okay. I forgive you.
Thank you. But I do remember there's like 3 ways in which you're able, as a citizen, to not obey a law. Because you were talking about like I'm obeying the speed limit, and like people who have scrupulosity, they're always like, I've been told that like that's not a sin, and like there's like
people who are scrupulous think that it's absolutely a sin.
Well, there's like there's like anyway,
and I think it is a sin to just willingly speed. It's not grave matter. Well, I guess it depends on how fast
you're going. Yeah.
If you like, I used to drive 5 over. I think driving 5 over the speed limit is not grave matter. However, we do have an obligation. It is a just. The speed limits are just laws. So we do have to follow them
at times.
Know?
So here,
at times.
So here are the 3 things. And so,
are you going to tell me when the speed limit is not a just law?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm excited.
So the first thing is that if it's an unjust law,
sure,
you're not morally obliged to follow it.
And do you know, what are the criteria? How do we know if it's an unjust law?
I don't want to define that.
Well, one of the things would be that if it violates the divine law.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
Yeah,
I didn't know because I'm sure
there are other reasons,
right? But like if it's a mortal sin and the state is calling you in which to do so.
Yeah.
Like you're like, this is what martyrs are made of, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So the first one is that. The second one is that the law was established, and if the lawmaker would have known that by establishing this law, so he establishes a law and he does not foresee the negative outcomes in which this law is being enforced. So like, let's say the traffic guy, the mayor decides like, we're going to put a stop sign right here. And he thinks it's a good idea. Like the consensus is this is a good idea. We need a stop sign right here. And not until the thing actually takes place and like they put the stop sign there and they realize this is a terrible spot. They can't see the stop sign. They're flying past it and it's creating a bunch of wrecks. Right? Like it's creating like you're slamming on your brakes. You're getting rear-ended. Everybody's getting rear. There's a lot of issues with this law. The lawmaker was not intending on that the case. So it's not necessarily an unjust law in the principle, because that wasn't the thought, but that it is in practice.
Yeah.
And so you're allowed to break that.
So you're allowed to fly through the stop sign? Maybe that's not the best example.
I'm coming up with an example.
I think it does show that there's an unintended consequence here that was unforeseen.
Right. And so
and the unintended consequence is worse than the thing
that they were trying to avoid.
Prevent.
Right. That is exactly right.
Okay.
And then the last one is that your state in which you are living is more important than the law. So
like your wife is having
pregnant,
a baby, and you need to get to the hospital right now.
And now you can
within reason.
Mm-hmm.
Within reason, you can't just drive as fast as you want.
Right, but within reason, like you can go 70 miles an hour down to 45.
Maybe depends on the road.
Yeah,
because if you're putting other lives at risk.
Well, yeah. So what you do is you also call 911 and be like, "Hey, listen, my wife's about to."
Right. I think that's the more prudential thing. Is like,
right.
Instead of speeding down the road, now like sometimes you might find yourself like, "Hey, this guy's arm got chopped off in a machinery accident, and if we wait for 911, he's gonna bleed to." I don't know.
Right.
There's a situation. You can come up with it.
So I think those are the 3.
But remember, our duty to the polis.
Mm-hmm.
is actually higher than our duty to ourselves.
Right.
Okay, we actually owe them a higher degree of justice than what we owe to ourselves. Okay, so if our own life is at stake, we can't put other lives at stake in order to save our own. Because that is putting the common good at risk.
Mm-hmm.
In order the good of the whole is more important than the good of the one, which is
what Cephas said. Caiaphas said.
Well, yeah, he did. It's better that one man should die than
everybody to suffer.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So way to do that.
So this is like
way to go, bro.
What was the Socratic dialogue where? Do you remember where he was talking about? Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and die. Where he dies. What's the last one?
The apology.
The Apology. Is that what it is? I can't remember.
Where Socrates dies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
So anyway, that's the big theme, and that's a great book.
Yeah.
When we read that one together,
yeah,
it really opened my mind.
I really
and
hated
made me really think a lot about.
I really hate
what
that.
Does it mean to be a
Hey,
citizen?
You should join us on the Youth Row. We're doing it August 8th at night, 8 p.m.
Oh, really? All right. Maybe I can.
You should do it.
Okay.
You haven't done any of them. You should.
Well, because you've been doing them real early.
Yeah, 6:45.
Yeah, but
I mean that's actually if I would do it during
you get up earlier than me, and so I have to decide: am I going to pray or am I going to do the book study?
Well, that is a false dichotomy.
It is my dichotomy. It's my real dichotomy. It's not false. It's real. Okay, I'll try.
You should try. You should
Let me look at my schedule.
Because that would be a lot of fun to have you on.
My schedule.
All right, I don't think I have anything else. I mean, how long was this episode?
Quick, turn it off.